At 10 minutes past 6 on the morning of December the 14th, 1992, Barry Sutcliffe was driving to work along Compstall Road, on the edge of Stockport, with two colleagues in the car. It was still dark. Something was moving on the road ahead of them. As they slowed down, they saw it was a girl. Her head was shaved. Her skin, where they could see it, didn't look like skin anymore, and she wasn't screaming. She was thanking them for stopping. That girl was 16 years old. Her name was Suzanne Capper. Within 4 days, she would be dead. Before that happened, though, she would do something none of the 6 people who had held her for a week expected. She would tell the police exactly what they had done to her and exactly where to find them. This is the Crime Almanac. Every name, every date, and every sentence in the next half hour comes from court testimony, inquest findings, and reporting from the time and since. None of it comes from guesswork, and none of it comes from anyone's retelling but the record itself. To understand how a 16-year-old girl ended up burning on a hillside outside Manchester, we have to start earlier. We have to start with who she was and how she came to trust the people who did this to her. People who knew Suzanne Capper described her the same way, again and again. Kind, polite, eager to help. The kind of teenager who noticed when someone else needed something and did it without being asked. She was also, by every account, easily led, not unintelligent, just trusting in a way that made her vulnerable to the wrong kind of attention. Her home life had been unsteady for years. Her parents separated while she was still a young teenager, and afterward she moved between relatives, family friends, and stretches of local authority care. She drifted between her mother's house and her stepfather's. She stopped attending Moston Brook High School with any regularity. What she was looking for, in the simplest terms, was somewhere to belong. And in a rundown Victorian terrace on Langworthy Road, in the Moston area of Manchester, she thought she'd found it. She hadn't ended up there through any one dramatic turn. She'd come to know Clifford Pook, the younger brother of a local woman named Jean Powell, and through that connection, she was drawn into Powell's household. She started babysitting Powell's children, first for a little money, then simply because she was there so often it stopped being a transaction. She helped clean. She made herself useful. And being useful, for a girl who had spent years being moved from place to place, felt like something close to being wanted. What she'd actually walked into was a house that ran on drugs and stolen cars, crowded with people who came and went at all hours. It wasn't a single household in the way most people would picture one. It was a rotating cast of friends, customers, and people passing through, with Jean Powell's Victorian terrace at Langworthy Road as the fixed point everyone orbited. Jean Powell was 26. Her estranged husband, Glyn Powell, was often around. So was a woman named Bernadette McNeely, 24, who lived a few doors down and eventually moved in with her own children, sharing a downstairs room with Powell because every bedroom in the house was already full. McNeely's boyfriend was a 16-year-old named Anthony Dudson. Rounding out the group were 2 more regular visitors, Jeffrey Lee, who came by mainly to buy amphetamines, and Clifford Pook himself, Jean's younger brother, the person who had first brought Suzanne into all of this. Suzanne's family could see something was wrong, even if they couldn't see how wrong. They tried more than once to keep her away from the house. It didn't work. She kept going back. Her sister Michelle, who had lived there herself for a period, would later describe Suzanne as someone who wasn't afraid of Powell and McNeely so much as desperate to please them. She'd do anything they asked, however she was treated in return. That single detail, a girl so hungry to belong that she stayed close to the people mistreating her, is the hinge this entire case turns on. Because in early December of 1992, the group she had worked so hard to be part of decided she was the problem. By the end of November, tension inside that house had been building for weeks. Arguments were more frequent. Trust between the adults in that group was thinning. And somewhere in the middle of that, 3 separate grievances attached themselves to Suzanne. None of them was proportionate to what was about to happen. None of them, as it would later become clear, was even true. The first was about money and pride. Jean Powell would later claim that Suzanne had tried to talk her into sleeping with a man Powell had recently met in exchange for payment. The man denied it ever happened, and police found nothing to support the claim. It didn't matter. Powell was angry about it anyway. The second was about a stolen coat. Bernadette McNeely believed Suzanne had taken a pink duffel coat of hers, worth around 50 pounds. There was no real evidence for that either. The third was about lice. In November, McNeely and Dudson both discovered they had pubic lice and had to shave. McNeely decided the source was a bed Suzanne had once slept in and blamed her for it. None of these 3 things holds up as a real explanation for what came next. A missing coat, a rumor about lice, a story about a man who denied it ever happened. Reporting on the case since has described them accurately as trivial, but inside a household that was already unstable, drug-involved, and full of people willing to egg each other on, trivial grievances didn't stay trivial. They became the justification for something none of them actually warranted. On the 7th of December, Jean Powell and Bernadette McNeely found Suzanne at her stepfather's home and told her a boy she liked was waiting for her at Langworthy Road. He wasn't. Glyn Powell and Anthony Dudson were waiting instead. And this time, when she arrived, she wasn't allowed to leave. What happened over the next week is documented in court testimony, in forensic findings, and in the account Suzanne herself gave police before she lost consciousness. It is not something this script is going to soften. On the first night, Glyn Powell and Dudson held her down and shaved her head and her eyebrows, making her clean up the hair afterward. They put a plastic bag over her head and took turns hitting her while she stood there unable to see. When she collapsed, Jean Powell and McNeely kicked her, then beat her with a wooden implement and a belt. She was forced into the bathroom and made to shave herself as well. A deliberate echo of the lice accusation, punishment, dressed up as symmetry. Powell locked her in a cupboard for the night. The next day, worried her crying would wake the children in the house, the group moved her a few doors down to McNeely's home. There, in a back room, she was tied spread-eagled to an upturned bed frame with electrical flex. For 5 more days, the assaults continued. Suzanne was injected with amphetamines and burned repeatedly on her face and legs with cigarettes. Through headphones at full volume, the group played a song called "Hi, I'm Chucky, Want to Play," built around samples from the Child's Play films over and over, until McNeely's opening line before each session became a kind of ritual: "Chucky's coming to play." She wasn't allowed to use a toilet. Eventually, the group forced her into a bath of concentrated disinfectant and scrubbed her hard enough to strip skin, in what they would later frame as cleaning her up. At some point during that week, Clifford Pook pulled 2 of her teeth out with a pair of pliers. Investigators later found those teeth at his house. The working theory, once the case reached trial, was chillingly practical. Pulling her teeth would make her harder to identify if things went further. By that point, somebody in that house had already decided she wasn't leaving alive. Here is the part of this story that is hardest to sit with, And it isn't the torture itself. It's how many people had a chance to stop it and didn't. Suzanne wasn't hidden away from the world for that week. People came in and out of both houses. Some of them saw exactly what was happening to her. Clifford Pook and Jeffrey Lee both visited the house during that week and were shown Suzanne blindfolded and tied to the bed. Neither of them called anyone. An 18-year-old named David Hill was brought into the house at one point and taken into the room where she was being held. He was left alone with her, briefly. She asked him for help. "She asked me if I could help, but I told her I couldn't," he said afterward. He didn't untie her. He didn't tell anyone outside that house what he'd seen. Separately, and at the same time all of this was happening, Lee and Dudson spent part of that week helping repair a car belonging to Paul Barlow, the fiancé of Suzanne's sister. Barlow had no idea Suzanne was being held only streets away. When the truth came out, he put it simply, "I did not think they were capable of such savagery." None of these men lit the match, but their silence bought the group time that ran out only because Suzanne's family, increasingly frightened by her disappearance, went to the police and filed a missing persons report. Once the group realized that report existed, they decided Suzanne had to be moved. Not released, moved. In the early hours of December the 14th, Suzanne was put into the boot of a stolen white Fiat Panda. Jean Powell, Glyn Powell, Bernadette McNeely, and Anthony Dudson drove her roughly 15 miles out past the edge of the city to Werneth Low, a stretch of high moorland near Romilly on the far side of Stockport, the kind of place people usually go for the view back over Manchester. They dragged her out, pushed her down a slope through brambles, doused her in petrol, and set her on fire. Believing she was dead, the four of them drove back to Powell's house, stopping on the way to pick up drinks. The other two men in the group were waiting there when they arrived. Suzanne was not dead. Somehow, burned alone in the dark on a hillside outside a city that didn't yet know her name, she got back up. She pushed through the same brambles they'd dragged her through and made her way roughly a quarter of a mile along the lane to Compstall Road, where Barry Sutcliffe and his colleagues found her at 6:10 that morning. They flagged down help at the nearby home of Michael and Margaret Coop, who called an ambulance. Margaret Coop would later describe trying instinctively to put her arms around the girl, and Suzanne pulling away. It wasn't out of fear. She simply couldn't bear to be touched anywhere near her burns. She drank water they had to hold to her mouth because her hands couldn't do it themselves. Everyone who helped her that morning remembers the same detail. She kept thanking them. Suzanne was taken to the burns unit at Withington Hospital in Manchester. The damage was severe enough that when her mother and father arrived, neither of them could recognize her by sight. Even so, gently questioned by police, she gave them the names of all 6 people responsible and the address where it had happened. Then she fell into a coma and never woke up again. She was identified in the end by a partial fingerprint from her thumb, the one part of her hands the fire hadn't destroyed. At 7:30 that same morning, acting on what she'd told them, Detective Inspector Peter Wall sent officers to 97 Langworthy Road with instructions to arrest everyone they found there. All 6 were taken in. Every one of them initially denied any involvement. Under questioning, it was Anthony Dudson, reportedly persuaded by his own father to tell the truth, who broke first and began describing what had happened. Wall, an experienced investigator by that point in his career, would later say simply, "As the story began to unfold, we just couldn't believe it." She died on December the 18th, 1992, without regaining consciousness. She was 16. At the inquest that followed, Coroner Leonard Gorodkin summarized what the medical evidence had already made clear. Suzanne had suffered burns across roughly 75 to 80% of her body. She had, he said, no chance of survival. And yet she had lived long enough to name every person responsible. The trial opened at Manchester Crown Court on the 16th of November, 1993, before Mr. Justice Potts, and ran for 22 days. All 6 defendants pleaded not guilty to murder. In their testimony, each one tried, in different ways, to minimize their own role in what had happened to Suzanne, pointing at each other, downplaying their own hands in it. Jean Powell's own account of the moment Suzanne was set alight cast her as a bystander to it. "I turned round and looked and saw Suzanne in flames," she told the court, adding that she'd felt numb and scared. The jury wasn't persuaded. After deliberating for close to 10 hours, they convicted Jean Powell, Glyn Powell, and Bernadette McNeely of murder. Each received a life sentence with a minimum term of 25 years, alongside long concurrent sentences for conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and false imprisonment. Anthony Dudson, 16 at the time of the offense, was convicted of murder as well. Because he was a minor, the court couldn't hand him the same mandatory life sentence as the 3 adults. English law, instead, orders young offenders convicted of murder to be detained indefinitely at the pleasure of the Crown, with a minimum term set separately. His was set at 18 years. Jeffrey Lee was acquitted of murder and conspiracy, but had already pleaded guilty to false imprisonment, for which he received 12 years. Clifford Pook pleaded guilty to conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and false imprisonment, receiving 15 years. He was acquitted of murder itself. Mr. Justice Potts, sentencing, called it as appalling a murder as it is possible to imagine. It's a short sentence, spoken by a judge who had presumably sentenced a great many violent people by that point in his career. It carries more weight for that. Appeals followed, as they usually do. Lee's 12 years became 9 in late 1994. Dudson's 18-year minimum was cut to 16 in 2002, after which he tried again and was refused. Bernadette McNeely's minimum term was later reduced by a year as well in 2013. Manchester's local press has returned to this case again and again in the years since, on its 20th anniversary, and every time one of the 6 has come up for release. Suzanne was laid to rest at Blackley Cemetery in January of 1993, roughly a month after the 6 people responsible for her death had already been charged with murder. Suzanne's case didn't end with the sentencing, because the people responsible for her death didn't simply serve their time quietly. At HMP Durham, where McNeely served part of her sentence on the same wing as 2 of Britain's most notorious female prisoners, Myra Hindley and Rosemary West, a routine security check in 1996 turned up letters revealing she'd been having a relationship with the prison's own governor. He resigned before any formal disciplinary process against him could be completed, and McNeely was transferred to HMP New Hall. By the time she came up for parole years later, she was being described on paper as a model prisoner, a description that sits uneasily next to everything else in this story. Meanwhile, McNeely's own children were living through that same week in a different way. Kelly and James were 7 and 5 years old at the time. Kelly would later describe what she remembered hearing from nearby as the scratches on the wall and the screaming, in her own words, years afterward. Both children also later described being physically abused by McNeely before her arrest, tied to chairs, hit with a belt, on at least one occasion needing hospital treatment. It had been reported to police and social services at the time. Nothing came of it. After McNeely's conviction, her children went into foster care. Under the law as it stood, though, she retained parental rights over them anyway, which meant she could insist they visit her in prison. They did, for years. Every one of Suzanne Capper's 6 attackers has now served their sentence and been released. Jeffrey Lee in 1998, Clifford Pook in 2001, Anthony Dudson in 2013, Bernadette McNeely in 2015, Jean Powell in 2017, and Glenn Powell, the last of them, in May of 2023, after his case was referred to the parole board. Manchester's own Member of Parliament, Graham Stringer, spoke publicly about the case around the time of that final release, calling it one of the most brutal and shocking murders in recent memory. All 6 remain on license for life, any further offense, and any of them can be recalled straight back to prison. But barring that, this is simply what happens next for each of them. They get to keep living. Suzanne didn't. Kelly, McNeely's daughter, is an adult now, going by the surname Higgins. She has spent the years since describing what those childhood prison visits were actually like. "It was tears going in and tears coming out," she said. She's not accused of anything. She was a small child, forced by law into contact with a convicted killer who happened to be her mother. Today, with the support of her foster mother, Sue Williams, Kelly is campaigning publicly for a change in the law. She's started a petition and spoken to national broadcasters, arguing that a parent convicted of this kind of abuse shouldn't retain the legal standing to insist their own children visit them, whatever a court has decided about custody. The UK government has pointed to provisions in the Victims and Courts Bill that would restrict parental responsibility for people convicted of serious sexual offenses, and separately committed to legislation removing parental rights from anyone convicted of killing their child's other parent. Whether reform reaches far enough to cover a case like Kelly's own childhood is still unresolved. Her campaign is ongoing as of this recording. Suzanne Capper spent 16 years wanting the same simple thing most teenagers want: somewhere to belong and people who wanted her around. She found a house full of people who used that against her, and in the end, every one of them is free. And she is not. If a case like this is the reason you're here, for the accuracy and not the spectacle, that's what this channel is built on. And subscribing means you'll see the next one when it's ready. If you know someone who'd want to understand what actually happened, rather than the shorthand version that gets repeated online, this is a story worth sending them. And if you're going to leave a comment, here's what we'd genuinely like to hear. With everyone responsible for Suzanne's death now walking free, did justice actually happen here?